BRB. How do I make you a host?
I don't think I need.
Hey, Griff.
Hi, Juan. I don't think that's Griff. I think that's Jess.
Hello, everyone.
I'm not really Griff, haha. Hey, Manuel. Hey, Juan.
Hello, Jess. Hey, Jess.
Hey, Antonio. Hey, James. Hey, Eugene, how's it going?
Good, Jeff. Yeah, I'm really excited to hear this presentation and what y'all put together. I know I've been chatting with Jess for a while, and I'm super excited. Personally, I'm very excited about all the governance topics that y'all cover. So yeah, I'm very interested in learning more.
Super cool. We need all the minds and expertise in this space we can get. So welcome. Hey, Sean. Hey, Dan. Angela, how's it going? We're just giving a couple of minutes for people to filter in.
Oh, you're muted, Angela.
Just was saying, I'm super excited for the session. Hello, Renzo again. I've just sent out thank you emails to the last cohort of ecosystem value flows. And of course, this reminds me of many of the connections we've made since July, right? And it's so awesome to see what emerges from there. And perhaps you're starting a new chapter.
Hello, Angela. Yeah, so pleasure
Hello.
to see you. And as I was saying to Jeff, it's been 3 years. It's been growing this network of interaction, knowledge, and experiments. So it's very exciting and fascinating how this organically is coming up. So thank you for everybody's contribution. So it's kind of collective.
Yeah, I can only second to that. And I mean, Andreas, we are currently working on token engineering workshops, and there are new levels, I think. Jeff, thanks for this email, bringing together learning and applying and learning and applying as an individual's journey throughout, let's say, that everybody's token engineering life. And so I think really exciting things to emerge from here. But yeah, now happy to learn about governance.
Absolutely. Welcome everyone who's dropping in. We're just going to kick off in a few moments once we have quorum.
Yeah, by the way, if I have the chance, I would love to share the link to the recording in our newsletter. And if you have it, just share it, because I would love to spread the word.
Absolutely. We've got the recording going, and we'll double check with James where the video repositories are going, if there's a specific YouTube slot, but we'll make sure to get you the link to include.
Cool.
So yeah, Livia, are you able to share the presentation from where you are? So yeah, welcome everybody. Thanks so much for coming. We may still have a few people popping in. So yeah, I don't know if you can present there, Livy. So welcome to the frontier, or space, whatever analogy you prefer, where we are exploring what we are coming to call as a collective polycentric governance explorations in Web3 ecosystems. This has been, as Angela and some of the others mentioned, a very much collective research into the space. So today we have 4 presenters who are coming together from varied experiences, backgrounds, different parts of the world, to share knowledge from experience in building decentralized ecosystems and across the DAO and common space. So if you want to go to the next slide, Livy, and we'll introduce everyone. So Jeff, if you'd like to introduce yourself for those who may not have met you yet.
Totally. My name is Jeff. I've been doing a lot of work at the Common Stack with block science, with CAD, OneHive, a bunch of different organizations, the Token Engineering Commons, of course. And yeah, really interested to be diving down this rabbit hole of governance exploration. And we have a few new concepts today that we're excited to share with you. And I'll pass it over to Renzo.
Hello, everybody. Excited to just join this movement about governance innovation. Based in Berlin, I act as a UX researcher / survey designer. In the last couple of years, I've been collaborating with Jeff, Common Stack, also with Angela. I've been part of the token events at the Berlin blockchain ecosystem in the summer, and lately I've been giving a talk about the combination between platform strategies and governance token design. So I'm here to just collaborating and give more contribution to the movement. So happy to pass to Livia.
Renzo, I'm Livia. I'm based in Brazil. I'm in the Common Stack team and also been leading the cultural build of the Token Engineering Commons since last year. And yeah, really excited to talk about governance. Also recently finished the Ecosystem Value Flows course of the Token Engineering Academy. Super recommend, very interesting. And yeah, happy to talk more about governance and share our experiences so far. And I'll pass back to you, Jess.
Yeah, I'm Jessica Zartler, and I'm also a member of the Common Stack team, working in ecosystem development and special projects and research collaborations, also working with block science part-time as well for research and supporting translating the kind of many languages that come in this cross-disciplinary field. And then also am a steward for the Token Engineering Commons, which is working on advancing the field of token engineering and doing kind of a lot of weaving in the ecosystem and cross-pollinating. I think this is a group of edge walkers, and all of you here are the ones kind of bringing this knowledge and sharing across ecosystems. So look forward to what's going to come out of the session today. And I'll hand it over to Jeff to introduce what we're going to be chatting about today.
Great. Do you want to jump to the next slide? Awesome. So we'll start out with a bit of the landscape in introducing Web3 governance. Am I muting, Jeff? So we'll take a few minutes just introducing what are Web3 ecosystems and what does governance mean within those ecosystems. And we've broken down this seminar into two main sections. So first we'll talk about defining the decision space and all of the sort of cultural considerations in the context of different decisions that need to be made in these kinds of ecosystems. And we'll have a short breakout session to get some hands-on experience with what some of those decisions might look like. And then in the second part of the session, we will be exploring the voting space. So looking at the tools available to determine some of the decisions that we decided on within the decision space. So, you know, essentially in the blockchain space, there's sometimes a tendency to lead with tools first. And we believe that there's really an important need to define and understand the needs and the context of decisions being made, and then match the tool appropriately to that context. So that'll be the kind of two main sections that we'll be covering today. And of course, we'll have a session at the end for some discussion and Q&A, and we look forward to some lively input from the audience as well. There you go, perfect. All right, so what are Web3 ecosystems? So a lot of people call these DAOs. Of course, these can be unpacked to have several components, and ultimately they're web native institutions that coordinate on shared issues. So DAOs often have a token. That token may control funds management. It may be used in voting. There may be reputation. There are various roles. So these are sort of groups of diverse stakeholders in digital settings that are sharing resources. So using tokens, for example, to allocate communal funds to projects that improve the well-being of those in the community. Perfect.
So yeah, kind of going with this meme here, that there's this myth about one governance tool to rule them all. We're seeing a lot of the discussion and dialogue around, people thinking that there is some magic solution that's going to solve for all of our decision-making and coordination issues. And that's just not true. So what we're going to do is in the next slide, and in this journey together, we're looking at it as more of a journey, which is very much unfolding, it's emergent. And in the next slide, what we're really going to do is we're going to burn our kind of overly simplistic mental models of governance. And we're going to really start to unpack the complexity that is coordinating with humans around the world that come from different cultural norms, different backgrounds, and figure out how to move beyond this very binary discussion, which is mostly focused on consensus algorithms and kind of at the protocol layer, proof of work, proof of stake. This is how a lot of people are having this discussion. So we're going to try to expand our perception in this journey together. And you can see here, we pulled this direct off Twitter. There are people just kind of saying, hey, we've solved governance, we've done it. Oh, really? So yeah, we see this kind of dialogue. So what we're trying to do here is plant the seed and also with you build this kind of group that can go out and start to chat with a little more, I guess, depth and context about how we can have better decision making, both culturally and of course looking at what tools are appropriate. So as Jeff mentioned, some people are kind of looking at solutions first. So what we're saying here is, all right, let's flip this on its head a bit and let's really sit with the problem. Let's understand the decisions that need to be made and choose really the right tools and the context that can address those challenges of kind of these coordination issues or challenges. So starting from this place of curiosity, exploration, and questioning, and definitely questioning our assumptions. So when we have this kind of open design space and we're starting the build of a DAO or a decentralized community, starting with questions rather than looking at solutions first. So we're kind of naming this the decision space so that we can have this collective terminology and a frame through which to look. And that sounds all great, right? So Livia's going to chat from her experience in what that actually means and what it looks like in implementation. So she kind of led me through some questions yesterday, actually, that we wanted to share with you.
Yeah, so Jess, what kind of decisions did you take today?
Oh man, well, what to eat, what to wear, not so much. I think kind of the Steve Jobs approach is pretty good of just having like, you know, Jeff says he just wears one pair of pants all the time, so he doesn't have to make decisions. What else? What to post on Twitter, I guess. Yeah, life's not too crazy because of COVID. I'm mostly inside. Whether or not I want to go for a hike, yeah, those kind of things, I guess. So yeah, Twitter brought up kind of this interesting discussion then.
Yeah, I think this understanding of the decisions that we have bring the awareness of how they influence the space around us. So for example, if I decide what I'm gonna eat today, this decision will most likely only influence myself. And this is already a decision that I have that maybe some other people don't have. So even understanding what types of decisions are a privilege to us, or what type of power do I have in certain decisions. So even though the food I'm gonna eat probably affect just myself, maybe just having the power to make a decision about a tweet influences other people. And maybe she has that choice and other people might not have that choice because of how much decision power they have. So yeah, this awareness of how much decision-making power we have and what are all the decisions we're making every day really help on setting up this decision space, and especially in a group, in this complex groups that we are a part of. When we all have this awareness, it makes a lot easier for us to question our decisions and to have more coherence when making group decisions.
Yeah, and just to add to that too, I mean, the content is important, yes, but also just to get in this practice and habit of questioning is really, I think, what is reflected by this decision space. So
Jeff and Renzo, do you guys want to jump in here?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I think that's a really great framing that, you know, when we have a decision to make as a group, there are some key stakeholders to get on board, you know, who has a say in the decision, who has the most expertise, who is most impacted by a decision, you know, making sure that these voices are heard and even amplified so that we can make appropriately aligned decisions that match the interests of the stakeholders who are, you know, both experienced, trusted, and impacted by those decisions is a really important consideration of that decision space. And also in token voting systems, we can also determine how to weight those voices. So we can make sure that you know, minority voices are heard accordingly. For example, if we are in a society that values such a thing, then we have that ability to kind of lift the voices and get a better collective signal from you know, groups that are oppressed or traditionally have not had the voice that they've deserved at the table in a lot of these kinds of decisions.
Yeah, probably I would add an additional lens on this slide, saying that decision space and body space is kind of zooming out and zooming in before to embrace a tool that's supposed to solve a problem. So the complexity of governance, as we know, as we go through this, requires an awareness of what kind of decisions I'm going to take. And therefore, what actually Livia said before is kind of guide through sort of touch points. They are crucial to frame and reframe the problem, the decision space. And then when we go into the voting space, we are, I think, much more equipped to understand, okay, for each context, there is a different type of voting space, especially in DAO settings or in blockchain space. So we are aware there are quadratic voting, as you see, the conviction voting, but we'll go through this later. So I think it's these two colors just to give you two different dimensions as well. So zooming out and zooming in is important instead of just to give yourself directly to a technical tool.
Yeah, so we can move into the defining the decision space. And first step first, we need to understand what is this initial space that will provide the best ground for us to make the first decisions. So I like to think of decision making as something that it's constantly evolving. So we don't need to have the ultimate best plan at first, because that's most likely gonna change. So what is this, the initial step with what we have? How can we understand the stakeholders that are present in the very beginning of a project or a process that we're going to be using in evolving decision making? So what are the tools that we have available? What are the first things that we need to decide? So having a first initial consensus, and that's usually easier when there are less people involved, because this requires a bit of a framing at first, and this will help bringing more people on board. So if you decide that first decisions are going to be taken in a meeting, and in that meeting you have a certain process for how everyone shares their voice, for how you start to see coherence being achieved, mural boards and participatory sessions are really helpful for that, because you can see all the information displayed and make sense of what is there. So I think it's important to have this first step somehow defined as a process, because when you're going to change a process, it's so much easier to change a process when you have one established. Because even if you don't have it established, you have it, you just don't have it clear for yourself. And in the future, if you need to change it and you don't have that clear, then it's gonna get messy. So yeah, just first step first to have this initial space to become decision ready. So there is a few, and we're gonna expand more on the decision ready, but there are a few processes of conversation, of interactive boards, of meetings, that you start to organize information to be like, okay, from here we can make an actual decision.
Yeah, and a lot of this, it seems maybe obvious or it's kind of intuitive, but I think pulling it out into this, making this a part of this process and creating a frame for decision space, then it becomes more like conscious and intentional. And then again, as Livia said, you can kind of plan and know that you'll have to have a lot of clarity, initial clarity and communication around what are the processes and how can those processes be changed from the get-go, and this kind of understanding that things are probably going to change. And then once you do that aspect, you can start to look at what needs governing. And so beyond the proof of work, the proof of stake, and the consensus algorithm, what needs governing within the community? So we're kind of seeing three layers that we're identifying as the community layer, funding layer, and then the kind of smart contractor on-chain layer. And we're not saying these are the only layers, and definitely would love to hear some feedback on expanding, this frame, but this is kind of emerging in where you have people looking at community constitutions, policy, codes of conduct and dispute resolution. Then there's kind of fund allocation, rewards for contribution or work. Some communities are very focused on intrinsic motivation and say incentives are coercive, and other communities use systems to incentivize people to do work. So there's a bit of a spectrum there. And then this smart contracts and looking at protocol upgrades or the parameters of the token economy and making changes. Who has the power and how are they able to change that, and how can they petition for any changes? And so that leads us to looking a little deeper, and some of the questions have already come up. So looking at, okay, what are my assumptions here? I assume that everyone has the same, when I say culture, even the word culture, I'm assuming that everybody has the same understanding of what that is. Or when I say community constitution, I'm kind of assuming that people know what that is. But again, having this really clear communication and even questioning the language that we're using and that others have the same understanding of that language. And then looking at what decisions that need to be made that are, again, we don't usually sit and know what decisions we're going to need to make. They are just emerging and kind of happen. And then Livia has this great point here of looking for common ground. I don't know if you want to expand on that.
Yeah, I think also this is a common assumption that we will have a common ground, but is there a common ground? And I think this is a great point for start questioning our assumptions, because assumptions come much from our cultural experience and from our way to view the world. So I come with a preconceived understanding of many symbols that make sense to me along my life. And when I communicate with people, I assume that they have similar meanings for these things that I have an understanding myself. So when we ask for a common ground and we start talking about what are things that make sense for all of us, or what are even the semantics of the words that we choose, like what does this word means to me, what does this word means to you, and then through that we can start refining somehow of a common place to start or a common direction to go towards. And a lot of the decisions, they emerge from this process, because sometimes consensus, it's mostly, it's not so easy. It's hard that like you're gonna start talking about a topic that multiple people are passionate about, and consensus is just naturally gonna be there. And this is great because when different opinions emerge and different assumptions start to be questioned, then some of these decisions are going to start to come up and be like, oh, okay, so we have this and that and that, and how do we go from here? What do we choose?
So yeah, I guess I just want to open it up for just a minute, just for a few quick comments. Does anybody want to share any other questions? If you want to go back one slide, Livy. What other questions, the questions for exploring. What other questions would we want to ask in this exploration? Does anybody have any thoughts?
I think there's a question in the chat from Angela.
Oh, okay, great. Thanks, James. I didn't see that. So Angela wrote, how to make sure that everybody's voice is heard. Are there any other questions that we should be asking when exploring the decision space?
I think on that line, always trying to think of how to get cultural alignment, and to the point that was just brought up in chat, how to allow people who are not as comfortable, who have different styles and different kind of communication mediums where they will shine and feel more comfortable. How do you, on the one hand, create all opportunities for everyone to comfortably engage, while not overwhelming people with so many options of how to engage that it just starts getting confusing and intense when trying to engage initially.
I wanted to follow up on that. Just looking at the sectors, you have economics and then the legal side and cultural side, and those have intrinsic characteristics of people. Like the economics is mostly extroverts, cultural is mostly introverts, and legal is kind of like very balanced people. And usually in startups or in they don't show up. You know, there's usually a lack of one of these temperaments are not there. So it's interesting to see how to make sure that they're participating, although, you know, it's hard to get an introvert to participate, or to get a balanced person to give opinion other than their stable. So it's taking it into more a physiological, spiritual side of things. It comes down to these three kind of gestures of people.
That's really interesting. And Andreas, did you want to expand a little bit? You wrote, do we need something like decision literacy or data literacy to be core competence for everybody?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I'm involved into a lot of data-related conversations, especially also on the regulatory space. And there's a big topic about data literacy to be a common, let's say, knowledge or skill that everybody needs. But we are very much lacking it. I mean, it has to start with school at the end. I think people who would be able to actively govern systems on that level you just described, it's not easy. And therefore we need to think of what are the basic skills everybody needs to have. And probably also how can we create systems that everybody can use. So, I mean, we talk a lot about experience, user experience, customer experience, employee experience. I think we also need a governing or governance experience. And even if it's not optimal, we need to make it accessible for everybody.
Yeah, great points. And then also, so we're gonna go on to the next slide, but we'll definitely have some more. Well, are there any last questions?
I wanted to make a quick point, if that's right.
Sure.
Thank you. No, I was thinking that as we think about inclusion, diversity, allowing multiple voices and so on, and it's very much undeniable that has a benefit. But I think it's also important to consider that it has a downside, that the more diversity, the more inclusion. I think it was a little bit mentioned with, if we have many options to communicate, then it can be overwhelming, the number of platforms, and the more diversity we include, the harder it can be to reach consensus and so on. And I think it's important to mention kind of like the shadow of diversity or the dark side of inclusivity, to think about it not as a binary choice, like one is good, one is bad, but rather think about it as a process. And instead of thinking how are we very inclusive from from day one, and how do we account for all these million different use cases and personality types and so on that can account, is more how do we create a meta process that can improve the way we do it. And so think about it like more as in setting the intention early on and building an approach to constantly improve in that area without necessarily trying to get perfection from the get-go, because it can also become paralyzing.
Yeah, awesome. That's, definitely a huge point. And I'm just going to mention a couple others, and then we're going to move along because we still have a lot to share, but we're going to have some open space and just a few so we can open this discussion a bit more with an interactive exercise. So yeah, a few more things are, do we want to be open and closed, transparent? How do we want to weight voices? Do we want to give subject matter experts more say in certain areas? So yeah, lots of questions to explore here, but again, just the act of questioning and some of the points that were brought up here about cultural understanding and finding this common ground. So yeah, then, and this brings up the next point, which is, just because we have a vote doesn't mean something is democratic. So obviously how it happens in dictator states, they have a vote, but it doesn't mean it's democratic. And on the next slide, any of you that have kids, I actually had a few years teaching little ones. There's this little trick that you do with kids where you make them think they have a choice, but you actually are giving them two things that you want them to do. So kids, you can clean your room or you can read a book quietly. So is that really democracy? Is this true democracy for the children? I mean, definitely not, but don't tell the kids this is the trick we use, but this happens, right? This happens in our political systems. So this is like the whole point, of asking these questions, is to figure out who is actually deciding what we're voting on to begin with. And is it true democracy if you don't engage with people on this process and have some space for them?
Just expanding a little on this point is understanding what are the choices you can have beyond the choices that you can immediately see. And I think we have been conditioned in society to only be like this slide, like Jess was saying, like to only see to only approach like voting, for example, every 4 years when we have the chance to do that by the government. But this brings back the awareness of the decisions we're taking all the time and every day. And doing this exercise more and more starts to give us a little bit more of an open view of, oh, but what are the choices I have beyond cleaning my room and reading a book quietly? Like, can I bring that up? Like, what if a question brings that question? What if a child brings that question to the mother? It would be like, yeah, actually, you have that that other choice too, and then you would have to debate a little bit more.
So yeah, when we start to ask these questions, that's when we see polycentricity emerging. And to be honest, when I first heard about polycentricity, I was very much like looking at it top down, like, yes, we must impose polycentricity, we must design for, but that's not actually how it happens. It's actually when you start to ask these questions that this space comes for different kinds of decision making, and we enable this polycentric decision making to emerge. So for each kind of decision, choosing an appropriate tool or a stakeholder group. And yeah, there are no panaceas, but of course, you know, tools do many things. So looking at what is the most appropriate one. And sometimes we don't even need to go as far as to have a vote. Maybe it's just a really honest, a little bit harder conversation, or there are some other tools that we can use. So yeah, and that brings us to hierarchy. I think in a lot of decentralized communities and in kind of the ideology, people think it's a bit of a dirty word, but it just needs to be used in context. So it depends, you know, this affects maybe the speed and the scale. With larger groups, it tends to move slower. It's very difficult to get this group consensus. So maybe there are, for example, like smaller specialized squad DAOs within a bigger DAO that could iterate more quickly, or there are hierarchies perhaps within working groups where there are subject matter experts that can, I guess, have a little bit more of this top-down decision making. But yeah, and non-hierarchy also, I think sometimes when we talk about flat decision making, we miss a few points there. And Livia always talks about this so well, in like the difference between hierarchy and leadership, which is also, again, these words kind of have these heavy connotations, but unpacking them a bit.
Yeah, there's something we like to say in the TEC of the structure we've been creating that is non-hierarchical but pro-leadership. So to imagine that a hierarchical space is tight. There's no room for expanding because the structure is very well defined. But leadership is a very important skill that, especially when we want to make things move fast or that we want to have a certain pace, it's important to have space for leadership, and leaders, they naturally emerge. But then someone brought the point of like the most shy people, for example, like how to open space for different types of personalities, people that have different expertises to bring up to the table, to have this space and to feel comfortable on stepping up on their leadership. So I think when a space is pro-leadership, it expands as long as people start to step up. So the more people step up, more that space opens and the larger it becomes. So it's a matter of scaling as well. And then the coordination comes in, and that's another challenge. But having people feeling comfortable to express their voice and their truth in a space that it's supportive of a multiplicity of leadership is an alternative to hierarchy, and it goes more towards flat decision making.
So yeah, and we're gonna move a little quicker, I guess, through these next couple of slides so we can allow for our interactive exercise and more space. But yeah, just talking about in socio-technical theory how, you know, social and technical aspects are really interdependent. So the culture feeds the technology and the technology feeds the culture. I don't know, Livia, if you had another.
Yeah, I think we usually see them separated. And then there is the cultural layer and the technical layer, but I think they are very inseparable. Even economics being a social science and technology being used mostly by humans, sometimes we forget that. There is a great article that Jeff contributed to with Block Science, talking about the difference between autonomy and automated, and how when we talk about decentralized autonomous organizations, we used to think about autonomous as the technical part, the robots, the smart contracts being autonomous. But what about the autonomy of the people and how they are deeply interconnected? So the more we look into the social side and how the people are using these tools in the best way possible, the more we can evolve the tools and vice versa. So one starts serving the other, and is this circular process that has no separation. So yeah, we have Jeff and Renzo, we're going to talk more about the tools, and we are trying to explore what are the spaces that exist for consent and consensus that come before us needing to vote, or before certain tools needing to be used. So even manifesto, for example, a document that people come together to state what is the purpose of them doing something, can be a consensus practice. Advice process is a great tool that we use a lot. So an advice process, if you propose something, when you're proposing that, you look for who are the people that are going to be affected by what you're proposing, and who are the experts in that subject. So if you have this awareness, you can contact these people to give you advice on the process that you're trying to implement. And by hearing this feedback and these voices and implementing this at your own discernment, you're probably going to have a much better proposal or project than you had in the first place. And this allows people to be integrated with what you're doing. And if the way you integrated didn't work, then they have the chance to step up and propose another process, like a voting, for example. And then working groups with subject matter experts or with people that understand about a certain topic. And when they are discussing, this can also be a space where a lot of decisions happen, and it's optimal and dynamic. So even meetings can be a decision-making tool, for example. If you have a little process that people can come together and discuss something and get to a certain type of agreement that most of the times doesn't need to follow other types of decision making. And also dispute resolution sessions. It's really important to have tools to come to peace agreements, or to or having spaces that people can talk using tools like nonviolent communication, for example, that also help on a certain type of consent or consensus to be reached without more specific tools.
Yeah, and I think that brings up, I mean, we've had so many learnings coming out of building the token engineering commons. And so we have this group Gravity, which Juan Carlos, who is here, and Livia started for nonviolent communication and conflict transformation, developing processes and trainings. But there are a lot of challenges because we are trying to be inclusive. We're trying to hear everybody's voice. But I think we're still trying to find this balance between like flat decision making and weighting experts, and how we actually do that and interacting in community is quite complex. So that brings up the challenges, which there are many. I think kind of yeah, Andreas mentioned education, and especially in this space with token ecosystems and so much knowledge to understand what is happening, let alone to be able to vote on it, to explain parameters of the token economy and how that works, takes a lot more work. And also we have kind of information overload, as I know we're all very familiar with. And of course, it has a high attention cost to be conscious, right? Being ethical is not easy always. So having this like bandwidth to be able to really fully and explore these ways the best we can. And then also the complexity and nascent nature of these new systems. So even the language that we're using, we have to first explain. It's like all of these dimensions. Shebnem Ruzicka always talks about, token engineering talks about, you know, we're building the roads, handing out the licenses, driving the cars. In all the work we do, it is so multidimensional, and that's a big challenge. And then of course, with any groups, there are always dangers of groupthink and a lack of critical questioning. And then power systems just have a tendency to become really quickly entrenched. Humans, it's so well documented that we are so resistant to change, and we kind of quickly attach ourselves to the status quo. So how to keep in that how to keep the mental model of that this process is iterative and that change will happen and new information will come, and we will need to adjust our decisions for the needs of the community. And then having, again, a community where you can actually do this with, that will take responsibility. So at the Common Stack, we have the Trusted Seed, which is a curated group where we're trying to get people who are aligned with the mission of the organization to support public goods and who want to see the collective benefit as well as the individual. And we call this kind of healthy initialization condition. So there's a consideration for that as well. And then, you know, Dr. Michael Zargum, who is the originator of a lot of these systems and idea, always talks about governance as a dumpster fire. But a nicer way to say that maybe is that governance is a journey. It's not a destination, as we said at the beginning. So we really have to look at this decision space as evolving and as a process, as a few of you have also noted. And just to summarize quickly our, you know, high-level bullet points from this section are there's no perfect form of governance. Diverse communities, they need contextual decision-making. They need different types of decisions depending on all of these different parts of the community. And then that there's a place for hierarchy, for flat decision-making. This landscape is just so massive. So again, that's why we're exploring together here. And it's very much an experiment. We're kind of seeing what works and trying to integrate and improve as we go along and see what works for the community. So,
and also, yeah, and also just keeping in mind that all of these things are a spectrum, and sometimes it's I think we tend to think on it's either or, it's this versus that, and all of these tools, and even from hierarchy to flat decision making, there is a whole spectrum of other types of governance and organization that that work for different communities. So I think it's it's back to this exploratory landscape.
So yeah, we're gonna move now to an exercise, and we'll have some space there for discussion as well. So there is a link that we just dropped in the chat for the Miro board. And I hope some people are familiar. And if you struggled to get in quickly, you can also watch on the screen as well. But we'll give a minute here. As everybody, if you want to just like voice like, hey, yeah, I'm getting in, or no, I'm struggling, just for a minute to jump over to this board.
So here we're thinking that we have a DAO, or we have a DAO in the make, and it's a governance research DAO, where our mission is to advance governance research development and exploration, education. So everything that will help the government space to flourish. And we have a question of how we might advance the work of the DAO. How do we do it? What types of decisions would we have to make? So each one of you has a little space here. You can put your name. If you don't want to put your name, it's okay. But you can bring up 3 decisions that pop in your mind of like what would make the decision, what would be the decisions of this DAO, and they can be any types of decisions. And if it's hard to think about decisions specifically directed to governance, they can be cultural decisions too, or decisions that you would have to make when you're in a group. And then under here, we have how to decide. So Renzo and Jeff are going to explore that more in the second part of this session. But we want you guys to think of very intuitively, how would you decide, how would you approach the decision that you put in?
So yeah, we're just gonna put 3 minutes, 2 minutes, let's say, on the board to enter your decisions and how to decide, and then we'll do a small round of reflections and sharing. And we've got about 10 minutes for sharing and also some discussion after this next minute here, where everybody's filling out their decisions.
I wish we had groovy that.
I know, we need some music. Should I sing? No. Does anyone want to sing?
Sure to sing.
Surprised Zoom hasn't made a Jeopardy music plugin yet or something like that.
Yeah, in the Discord we have GroovyBot. You can play, you do like a command and you can play from YouTube or Spotify or...
Some Brazilian songs will be nice, Livia. I know a few, but they're going to be the same.
Okay.
For a dance?
It never works so well for me when I put like in the computer to Zoom. I think there is a trick that I'm not
Okay, I have a proposal for the music. Tell me if it works for everybody and you can hear it.
We have about 30 seconds, so it'll be short music.
How do we decide on the music?
How to decide?
Brazilian.
Okay. Does anyone want to share? Or I will call on somebody randomly. Does anybody feeling a burning desire to share their decisions?
I can.
All right, let's go for it. James, there you are.
All right. So I'm still figuring out how to decide on metrics. I'm not sure if that's easy to put in a sticky note, but I was thinking about 3 decisions to be made high level. So deciding on the goals, I feel like that's important whenever you're doing something as a group. Timelines are helpful. So defining those goals in terms of specific timelines might be a second part of the first decision, but that's another category, I guess. And then how you evaluate success in terms of metrics, key results based on the goals, the objectives you have as a DAO.
Yes. And maybe that surfaces, maybe there's going to be people who realize like, oh, you're talking about timelines. I don't want to be on a timeline. So even just to look at the types of decisions that are coming up here. And so
Yeah,
how would you decide? Do you want to go into the tooling a little bit or?
Oh, well, I feel like a lot of the assumptions would be that funding is the main use case or like the main focus of a DAO. However, I think it's a lot more important to think about projects and kind of like the success overall in terms of community growth, for example, or development. So you actually have completed work instead of just like funding, which is the goal. But of course, funding is necessary, and we have a platform that can be used for payouts based on results of proposals. We've been doing that for this hackathon as an experiment. All of our prizes are going through that Sputnik DAO platform. So wanted to mention that because you asked about tools, but of course we have our governance forum as well for discussion, and we use project boards kind of all over the place. GitHub is a good place for project boards. We use that, but we also have Notion and other places. It just kind of depends on the team and preference. And then for metrics, we have a dashboard that is being developed, and that's kind of a question mark, so that's why it's not filled in yet. But we have a system where all of our teams establish their quarterly objectives and key results with specific metrics, and that's kind of our approach, but the tools aren't specific yet. We have a dashboard in the works. I mean, it's up and you can see it now. I'll put it in the chat. But that's my few minutes here. Thanks.
Does anybody else want to share, or should we?
I can share mine. Oh, sorry. Oh. You can go.
Go ahead.
All right, I'll do. First, you see, there was a misunderstanding. I took just private decision making. What to do first in the morning? Look at my to-do list, and this helps. I'm pretty tired, and it's not easy to think clearly for me at the very first 30 minutes. So my to-do list helps for what decision needs to be taken, and then select priorities. Then ride my bike. Can I go on a bike trip today? I look at the weather forecast, and this helps me to decide if it's a good idea. In Germany, it rains pretty often, and you don't want to be surprised by a thunderstorm. And then, should I leave my husband? I mean, this is maybe exaggerating, but this is a huge decision. I would ask some friends, should I or better not? And then, of course, then realizing, oh, we are talking about DAOs here. I just thought there's a pattern here, isn't it? So sometimes you have great helpers in taking a decision that are helpful individually, like my to-do list. So this is probably not helpful for Livy, but for me, it's incredibly helpful. Ride my bike, a weather forecast. This is a well-established tool to help everybody in everybody's life for decision making. And then there are these huge decisions that are really very individual, and where it's hard to have objective data, right? To take a look at, to assess if a decision left or right is a good decision. And so where's the relation to probably a DAO or a community? I think that similar to a weather forecast, we might have great tools that help us in decision making. And I think for the complexity of the questions on the table, assuming risk assessment of a certain change of parameter or hedge parameters now, the decision making here, having tools available that help us digest risks, benefits, this is great. Most of the times we don't have it though today. Then I can't envision now a tool that help us in individual decision making in DAO questions, but probably there might be some. And then there's huge ask some friends. There will be still, I guess, huge decisions that are very individual choices on values. Do I still share the values of this community, or do I still share the route community is taking? And this might be then even more difficult, but at least I felt, oh yeah, looking at these questions helps me to maybe see a pattern.
Hi everybody, I want to follow up on that. So, I'm a private pilot, and there's some functions in there that were in decision making that is their lifesaver situations. And when you go into travel, there's 3 things you need to do: is aviate, navigate, and communicate in that order. So if you find yourself in a situation, the first thing is to gain control of yourself in the direction you're going. So make sure you're not upside down towards a mountain. Second is to know where you are and where you're heading and where you want to go. And the third one is to communicate as soon as possible anywhere else, so that everybody knows where you're going. So in this sense, it's like it's good to move forward as long as you have the transparency to then communicate and revert what you're doing. It's a bit of it's organic in the sense that you're working with this full aviation system, but taking the responsibility of the first 2 things by yourself and then letting them know what you're doing. In this sense, it's somewhat interesting to approach, and it's saved my life twice actually. So it's good method.
Did you want to also share your decisions that you have there on the board, Sebastian?
Oh yeah, decisions. Well, it relates to that in a way that I put a TEC proposal based on 3-folding, sociocracy models, and holacracy, and it kind of relates to that. Whether can the individual be a hologram of the whole, and making sure that if there's not enough representation, then you can actually come up with paradigms to actually advance without full quorum. So if anybody take a look at that read there, it's based on a couple of social structures that are interesting and representative of the entire system. And yeah, it's take a little read there. So it's short.
Can I go next?
Absolutely.
Okay, so actually I did 3, but then I added 2 extra notes there. So the first kind of decision I would talk about is resource allocation, kind of allocating money, right, in a sense. So I would propose the decision to be 1 token, 1 vote. So the token holders with more tokens get to vote more because they own more of the decision, right? And that's supposed to be a consensus of 80% unity and 20% quorum. So 20% of the people need to vote. And that's basically how we do this at Haifa. So I think this makes sense for resource allocation. But for instance, for other kinds of decisions, for instance, changing agreements that impact the whole, this kind of decision making is somewhat poor. So I would prefer to listen 1 person, 1 vote. So listen people individually because they are equally, in a sense, bringing voices that would matter equally to the purpose, right? So then I would also be checking for objections, not actually a yes or no vote, or I like or I dislike vote, but actually, do you see harm in this change, right? Do you see harm for the purpose with this change? So this is in line with the sociocracy and holacracy consent decision making. So, and then when we need to decide regarding attention focus on what to do next, we have this 100 things to do. All of them are kind of equally important. Anyone has personal opinions on what should be done next. how do we decide? Then I would also go with like this one person, one vote, lean coffee style. I don't know if you used lean coffee before, but it's a technique for facilitation for group discussions where everyone adds like a post-it with ideas for discussion, and then people vote with a bunch of tokens for each of the post-its. So in essence, you start discussing the ones with more votes. So this makes sense to focus attention on what the group wants to do next in that group right now. So that makes sense for me. So then I added these two bars to the right. So all purpose driven decisions for me, based on not your personal preferences, they should be done by consent, because you are working towards the purpose, not thinking about your own, personal preference. But if you don't see harm, and if you're talking about the purpose, you should be using consent. But for decisions that impact personal preferences, I really like this or dislike this, and then it's fine to use consensus or voting, traditional voting. That's my general distinction here. That's it.
Okay, wonderful, really interesting. And yeah, we'll be coming back to this we're going to move to part 2 now, exploring the voting space. And interesting, Julio, you brought up, one person, one vote, and one token, one vote. We're going to explore some different ways and look at all of these different types, and then do an interactive exercise that we'll be drawing on this first section. So thanks so much, everyone, for that enlightening session. And I'm going to hand it over to Renzo and Jeff, who are going to bring us into the voting space.
Awesome. Let me just get my screen sharing working here. Perfect. Thumbs up if you can see my screen. Perfect. Awesome. So yeah, thanks for the fantastic rundown of the decision space. And the next step here, once we've defined the decision space, is exploring what tools are available to us and what tools match the context of the decision space that we've defined. So for each decision, there's a contextually appropriate tool. And there are many different ways to decide. I really liked, Julio, your comment about why one token, one vote systems are better than one person, one vote systems. And even therein we have a wide range, how we allocate tokens. Do we allocate those democratically? Everyone has the same number of tokens. Do we allocate them meritocratically? The more skin in the game, the more time or funds you contribute, the more say you have. We also, especially today in the Web3 space, see a lot of plutocratic decision making. In other words, those with the most tokens, aka those with the most money or skin in the game, make a lot of the decisions. Of course, we can look at delegated options, quadratic options. There's now continuous voting through conviction voting, and a lot of other ways to decide. So diving into some of those, a lot of people kind of hold up one person, one vote as the pinnacle of democracy. But it's actually kind of a binary system. You can either say you're for or you can say you're against. You can't really demonstrate how much you're for, how much you're against. There's no intensity of preference in this system. So this is just sort of a block diagram we show. These are three people making decisions. They have a yes choice or a no choice. And then those get tallied up and the proposal passes or fails. So this is kind of making like a circuit out of governance, or looking at it that way. So one person, one vote. The biggest issue, it doesn't capture intensity of preference of the members. It's either for or against. And there are a couple of resources on the false promise of one person, one vote. Definitely recommend checking those out and figuring out how we can kind of move forward with new ways to give people more intensity of preference in democracy. One of those ways is doing one token, one vote. Now, of course, if we allocate those tokens democratically, if we give everyone, for example, 10 votes, now they can demonstrate how much they're for something, rather than just for or against. They can be very for or very against or anywhere in between. It really gives us a spectrum a better signal that we can give to the systems that we are operating within. But in the DAO space, we also have the question, should everyone have equal say? Maybe some people contribute more time or more effort or more funds or more expertise. And in that case, we can consider allocating tokens instead of democratically, allocating them meritocratically. And meritocracy has a bit of a funny flavor. It's one of those terms that was introduced kind of to disprove itself. So meritocracy kind of has this shadow associated with it sometimes. But essentially what it means is voice through participation. So if you put a lot of time into a system, you earn more voice in that system. And if you put a lot of funds to bootstrap that system, then you also have more voice and more say over how that system evolves. So we can see here, the person on the top is a small holder, so they only have 5 tokens. The person on the bottom has put a lot more time or effort into this DAO. They have a lot more say, but of course they can choose how many tokens to allocate to a decision. It's not every token has to be used every time, so they have a much wider space of action in terms of demonstrating how much they are in support or against different proposals. But of course, once we give some people more voice, we have to consider the people who have less voice and making sure that we're balancing between the needs of all the humans in these ecosystems, because ultimately that's one of the reasons that we're all here, is exploring how we can give voice and make decisions appropriately as a collective. And minority opinions are also really important to hear. So in the balance between these large token holdings and small token holders, we can consider quadratic voting. So a lot of you have probably heard of this in a couple of different contexts, but essentially quadratic voting can be used to maintain equity in an ecosystem. So in this scenario, we can see there's a whale who has 1,000 tokens and a minnow who has 100 tokens. And while the whale has 10 times the tokens, when you actually vote with those tokens, each vote costs quadratically more than the last. So your first vote costs 1 token, your second vote costs 4 tokens, your third vote costs 9 tokens, and so on and so on. So that ends up with the effect that although you have 10 times the tokens, whales only have 3 times the influence, because you actually take the square root of those tokens. And you can see that this helps to balance voice in a system where we want some people to have more say, but we don't want them to have so much say that they can just run away with the show and not listen to anybody else, because this just creates broken institutions that won't live up to the standards that we're trying to build here. And of course, one of the voting tools that we're really excited about at the Common Stack is conviction voting. So this is kind of a real-time signaling. So you can see this bucket here, you can consider like a battery or even like a bucket filling up with water. And each of the token holders is like a tap. So the number of tokens you have denotes the amount of water in your tap, and you can change your votes at any time. So this moves away from time-based voting systems where we have a week, for example, for presidential election, or even a town hall. We all get together and say, hey, here are the problems, now let's all vote. And then we take the result of that vote and we implement. Of course, when we move to decentralized decision-making systems where we are global in nature, we have time zones spanning the world, it's really difficult to get everyone in the town hall in one space and one time to get up to speed on all the issues. So conviction voting is an attempt to address the distributed nature of decision-making in Web3 ecosystems, and allowing for this kind of continuous voting or vote streaming, where votes can be changed at any time. Those tokens charge up this battery or fill up the bucket, depending on the analogy that you like to use. And then when it hits this proposal passing threshold, the proposal moves into it's passed, and then funds are dispersed and work begins. So yeah, this is a different way. And just to note, tokens stay with the voters. You're not actually sending your tokens into the bucket. Your tokens just charge up the bucket. And then, so this can be analogous to how decentralized decision-making in nature works. This is like neurons in the brain. When a neuron charges up enough action potential, it fires and excites the next neuron, and so on. And this is how we see distributed decision making in natural systems. Mycelium also works on sort of similar problem solving at the edges. So we're really trying to take some of the processes of natural decision making and apply them in these kind of Web3 ecosystems. And of course, we can only do that now that we have these rich temporal data flows of blockchains. And this would be really hard to do with pen and paper on a traditional ballot. But luckily, we have these new technologies that allow us to question some of the assumptions that we had about how we make decisions and how we vote traditionally. And some of the qualities of conviction voting: it allows for continuous dynamic input. It also mitigates last-minute vote swings. And also what some people are postulating about now is sort of flash loan style governance hacks. For those who aren't aware, flash loans are kind of loans you can take within one block of the Ethereum ecosystem. And if you pay that back within that one block, then you don't have to, you can get away without repercussions. So some people are worried about, for example, someone within one block buying a massive number of Uniswap tokens, passing something on Uniswap, and then selling those tokens back all within one block. So we have these kinds of flash loan governance attacks on the horizon. And conviction voting is one way. By adding in the temporal aspect, it needs time to grow support in that community. You kind of cut that attack vector where we might see in other ecosystems, people coming in, buying up a bunch of tokens, making a decision, and passing it, and then giving those tokens back all within one block. Another great thing about conviction voting is it moves from consensus to consent-based decision making, or at least towards consent-based decision making, because it doesn't require majoritarian support for each decision. We can, decisions can be made based on sufficient support even within a small locality of the DAO. One other flavor of conviction voting is dynamic average consensus. So rather than having this proposal threshold in which the proposal passes, we actually just have a continuous range. So this could be used to set a community tax rate or budget allocation between various sub-DAOs or departments of a DAO. And these people can continuously change their inputs. And for example, the rate will go up and down between some range. And that can be sort of a continuous parameter decided for the community using conviction voting as dynamic average consensus tool. So this could be a really interesting tool for collective intelligence in allocating shared resources. It allows the community to give dynamic input on policy choices in real time. And it creates or could create less political deadlock and allow for more natural flows in these kinds of ecosystems. Of course, in Web3 ecosystems, there's a lot of people experimenting with delegating trust. Really exciting potential to crowdsource the collective intelligence of a network. It kind of creates a grassroots political system, as you can see on the left here. So each of these citizens has delegated their vote to a proxy, and the proxy can vote in, with the weight of all of the people that trust them. Of course, if you want to be like this citizen on the left here and vote directly, you can, and you have a proportional amount of say in the system. And this allows us to assign tokens to, trusted or experienced representatives or people who are impacted by a decision. We want to make sure that they have a voice and are able to feed into the process. And ultimately, this creates a more resilient and bottom-up decision-making network. So looking at consent and consensus, maybe I'll just take a moment to explain this diagram. So each of us has a sort of a small subset of things that we agree with and a much larger subset of things we can tolerate. And then everything outside of that, we don't want to happen. So when we make decisions as a group, the overlapping area that we agree with is consensus. So this is, we both agree that this is how it should go. But consent is actually a much larger overlap because it doesn't ask everyone to agree, it just asks everyone to tolerate the decisions being made. And of course, different tools sit within different kind of areas in this consent versus consensus landscape. So something like a multi-sig wallet would demonstrate more consensus. So everyone agrees this is how, or we've set, doesn't have to be everyone, of course. We usually see quorum and support somewhere between 50 and 80%. And if 80% of the people agree that this is what should be done, this is the consensus, that then becomes binding and we move forwards. To compare the advice process that we talked about in part one, I think Livy mentioned it and chatted about it a bit. This is more of a consent tool. So making sure that nobody disagrees as opposed to making sure that everybody agrees. Same thing with conviction voting. It's more of a consent tool than a consensus tool because it doesn't require everyone to agree. It just requires sufficient support in the community to move forward with the proposal. And as we've mentioned a few times, the Token Engineering Commons is doing some great work pioneering, Web3 polycentricity. The three layers that we've kind of identified are the cultural layer, where decisions such as the code of conduct, dispute resolution, how we reward contributors are decided via appropriate tools on the cultural layer. For the funding layer, we plan to make use of conviction voting. This will allow us to seamlessly distribute resources and economic value to everyone that's participating in the TEC. And then finally, we have the smart contract layer, which is sort of the highest access layer. This is voting to configure, upgrade, change smart contracts, fix them in the case of bugs. And we have different decision-making tools for each of these layers of governance within the Token Engineering Commons. And with that, we're going to jump over to the final breakout session and have some more discussion on various voting types and get some more feedback from you guys. Did you want to share the Miro board, Renzo?
Yes. So first of all, thank you so much to be with us this far. So I will share the screen and just I guess you all see it as a voting space. If you don't, just signal in the chat, but I suppose we are all here again. So I guess we are going towards the connecting the dots and sense-making part that you've been listening from. The decision space, the importance of understanding what type of decisions is to be made, and we're going towards the voting space as Jeff listed. Four main way to approach the voting space. So here in this section, we're going to look at what happens when the democratic approach happens. So the democratic, as we all know, have one person, one vote, and has some shortcomings. So we vote just every few years. So there is lobbying, it's expensive, and there is potential corruption behind. So instead, we're gonna move towards the one person, 10 votes, and I will just set up now the voting space. And if you just give me 1 minute, I will just set it up for 2 minutes. And I will explain you that we selected 3 decisions based on what you've done previously. And as now I will press, you all should be able to vote on those 3 decisions selected in the democratic allocation, 1 person, 10 votes. So I press now start. You will have 2 minutes to cast your 10 votes based on those 3 decisions. Please bear in mind that they might not match the decisions with the tools, but it's more about now understanding the dynamic of 10 votes for 1 person. So I'm pressing now, and you should be able to cast your 10 votes. From now, go.
We're choosing our favorite decision?
Yes.
Okay.
So you can pick actually your favorite decisions.
And as Renzo mentioned, this is the less important about the specific decision. We're just trying to get a tangible feel for what it's like when you have 10 votes per person compared with 1 vote per person. So if we only gave everyone 1 token to vote, you could only choose decision 1, 2, or 3. But since you have 10 votes, you can have a much richer signaling space. You can, say maybe you like decision 1 a little bit, you like decision 2 a lot, and you don't like decision 3 at all. With 10 votes, you can allocate as you like between those with a much richer signal for the DAO.
Hey Jeff, so you voted on all 3. What's that mean? Can you explain that a bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're looking at Renzo's screen right now. Yeah, so ultimately, the type of decision being made is a big factor here. A lot of decisions in DAO ecosystems is deciding between different proposals. So there may be, for example, 3 decisions or 3 proposals up on the table. We have these 3 as an example, and there may be different members of the community who are in favor of all 3. They may think that all 3 need to move forward. However, other community members may want to prioritize only one of those or 2, or perhaps veto even one of them, which I think there would need to be different kind of decision-making system, because we don't actually have negative voting in this tool, but there are definitely other tools to manage that. But ultimately, we are looking at kind of different tools to allow people to express their preferences in whatever way they find appropriate. Did that answer your question, or did you have another thought on that?
No,
I love how
okay.
meta
Okay, thanks.
this is.
Yeah, so we want to, again, share this diversity of impact of different voting approach towards decisions. And therefore, so from the democratic to 10 votes, 1 person, there is any reflection that you want to share based on actually what you express on your decisions and how to decide. There is anything that you want to share at this point? Okay,
Yeah,
so
quickly
go ahead.
then. Yeah, I think it's very rich to be able to not have a yes or no, but actually to direct where you want to focus instead of saying, I dislike this, I like this. So maybe I don't have to, well, I miss this this option to kind of block something, because for instance, I wouldn't decide what to post on Twitter in a DAO, so I would kind of block this kind of decision there. But it was very nice to be able to allocate these tokens and see what happens. So, thank you.
Oh, thank you, Julia, for this. So eventually here, you can see there is a potential of expressing an intensity towards decisions, which is different from democratic and meritocratic. So meritocratic, there is anyway minorities left behind, and there is an unequal reward system. And then actually we move now towards that scenario. So if we are going towards the here on the meritocratic allocation, so imagine there is for the decision 1, there is Jeff, decision 2, there is Bob and Jeff, and then decision 3, there is Alice with 3 votes and Jeff and Bob. But if I come because I have more say than anyone else, because the merit of having more power, then I have all the shots and I make decisions just based on what is not actually being decided collectively. So this is the scenario of meritocratic. And then moving even down on the quadratic voting example is what I think before Jeff mentioned, there is more balance about the voting power. And actually, there is a real exist scenario that happened in Colorado in 2019. And there was actually a collaboration between the Democratic Earth Foundation, a Radical X exchange, and they experimented in the state of the parliament in Colorado State of House. Sorry, they just they experimented how they could vote towards bills. And eventually what happened there was they solved the problem about the tyranny of the majority. There was also, they reduced the factional control problems. And as Jeff explained before, so there is this square votes after your first vote. So there was more balance and there was more a sense of prioritization of what to address. And I will share anyway the articles about the Colorado that happened 2 years ago. And from this point, I think we can move towards the last conviction voting simulations that I think you can see here. We would want to design this session in a more practical experience as possible. Why have to, conscious of time, you also want to have a sense-making process from what you listened before, the breakout session that we did, and then now with this voting system that we are sharing, we would like to ask you what actually is the difference before. But before, I think we can watch the video, and Jeff, maybe you can introduce more about this simulation.
Sure. Can everybody see the GIF? I see it's loading for you, Renzo.
Yeah.
Maybe if it's taking a long time, I can.
You want to share your screen?
Sure.
Shall I stop and you want to share yours? Maybe
sure.
It works better yours?
Yeah. All right, there we go. So this is sort of a play simulation that was created to demonstrate conviction voting. We wanted to give a tangible feel for how it works as well, but it's really difficult to do in a Miro board. As you saw, kind of moving tokens around, it's hard to demonstrate how those tokens can grow in weight over time. But this is actually one of the key components of conviction voting, is that your voting weight is charging up the longer you leave it towards a proposal. So you can see, or maybe if I zoom in a little bit, so at time 20, one of the voters changes their stake to 1,000, and you can see that it takes a period of time before it actually charges up to 1,000 weight. And then at the next time step, we have the second participant joining and also staking 1,000 tokens towards this proposal. And then you see in the third step, this participant takes their stake away. So it has the ability to charge up and discharge, or like a bucket of water with a hole in the bottom. Everyone is pouring their tap into the bucket, but there's also a consistent drain, which could be loss of attention or loss of interest in this proposal. But ultimately, we have this threshold at the top here, and we can see that once support in the community passes the threshold, the proposal goes through, funding is released, and work can begin on that proposal. So that's kind of one view of how conviction voting works in terms of the weight of your vote growing over time. This is also one more demonstration of conviction voting kind of from a system level. Okay, it's just loading. So this was one of the models and simulations that we did for conviction voting. So along the left here, we have a bunch of red dots. Each of these red dots are participants in the DAO. On the right side, we have blue dots are suggested proposals. And you can see once people support that, so these red lines between are DAO participants supporting proposals. And the more lines you see, the more support there is. The darker the line, the more tokens that holder has. So this is a model that takes into account the meritocratic process. So all of these token holders may have different token holdings. They may have different preferences over which proposals should be passed. And you can see that these charge up to 100%. Then they turn yellow, which means in progress, and then green for complete. And this is part of a larger model we have that's looking at how these systems work. This was created in CAD, which is a simulation and modeling tool. And you can do kind of agent-based modeling and system dynamic modeling And of course, one of the things we're really excited about at the Common Stack is validating our decisions and tools before we put them live into a deployed environment. So this is just kind of another system view of how participants support proposals, and those proposals charge up in support, and then they pass, funds are released, and then the project is executed. So just giving sort of another higher level view on conviction voting there.
A question, Jeff.
Yeah, please.
So if I am a member and I have like 1,000 tokens and there are like 10 proposals, do I have to allocate my 1,000 tokens between the 10 proposals? Or and I can only allocate them back once the proposal passes, or I withdraw the tokens? So it's always allocating my tokens between the live proposals. Is that it? Just to make sure I understand.
So there's actually, even with conviction voting, there's quite a few ways to configure it. I've seen a couple of different ways that people have gone about it thus far. OneHive is one of the first deployments, actually the first deployment, and you don't have to allocate all of your tokens. So if I just like this proposal, this is OneHive, by the way, and this is their proposal board, and this works using conviction voting. So if I want to support a proposal, I can click into this one and I can choose to allocate my voting weight. And here's the threshold to pass. So it needs 2.64% to pass. It's currently at 2.59% support. But you can also put your votes in an abstain proposal. So essentially this makes, it slows down the process. So if you think of this almost like a metabolism, like this DAO is churning proposals through continuously, and the abstain proposal is sort of a way to slow that down. So if I want to like slow down the system, essentially, I want to say, hey, we should make decisions and we should make them continuously, but we shouldn't make them too fast. I can actually put my votes towards abstain, and this actually slows the conviction growth across other proposals. So I'm not sure if that added or helped with your question, but you don't have to allocate all of your proposals or all of your tokens to a proposal. You can allocate to the proposals you like, and you can even allocate to the abstain option, which slows down other proposals. So we don't have a way that you can stop other proposals, but there are ways to kind of increase the viscosity of the system if we're worried about, decisions being made too fast or funds being distributed too fast.
And also, just to add to that, yeah, Julio, you're kind of feeling into the fact that, I mean, this is very new. So the design is pretty wide open, even for no one has really tested or implemented conviction signaling and dynamic average consensus that Jeff was talking about. So there's so much room here to explore. And as you also said about blocking proposals, we have this abstain, which doesn't really block. So another iteration that's coming is called Celeste. It's disputable conviction voting. And I would say this is more for proposal spam and kind of fraudulent claims that you would want to remove from the system. But it is still being built and hasn't quite been tested. It's somewhat like a judicial system, but I guess they don't want to be calling it jurors. They're trying to come up with new language and how to explain how this disputable system would work. But basically you stake your tokens if you want to dispute or have a proposal removed. So it costs it actually costs to participate with this process. So this would hopefully be only for fraudulent proposals, but yeah, I think there's a lot of ways that we could explore the design of this system and look at some of these aspects that you're bringing up.
Are there any
so
other?
I guess I was, even though Yulia, if you want to go on, I just want to kind of wrap up to ask everybody. So if now you look back at how you decide for your decisions, based on what you experienced so far, there is any reflection or any different mismatch on how you analyzed your context and how you could maybe create a dynamic sense-making conversation where we can share pro and cons and this polycentricity approach towards the decision space thanks to the voting space. That's our final purpose to move at
One question that I had was, are you able to change the proposal once it's up for voting, or after it's open for voting, you can't change it anymore? So this is very critical for HIFU, for instance, right now.
That's a great question, actually. I don't think that's been discussed that much, but I can see what you mean, because if you put one thing, you're going to do X and it gains support, and then you change that at the last minute to doing Y, this is actually an attack vector. You've gained a lot of support for something and then changed it at the last moment. So yeah, ultimately, whenever we deploy these systems, we need to make sure they're deployed in an appropriate context. So I think whenever a community is looking to deploy conviction voting, questions like that are the exact ones that need to be asked. And then we need to design protection against the attack vectors that can take advantage of these systems, because ultimately the tool isn't the end goal. It's the process that involves both the culture, the context, and the technology and the tools. And we can build these into responsibly designed systems. But ultimately, it will change so much on a context by context basis and what you're using the tools for. So these are important questions to keep top of mind throughout, I think.
And the place
sorry, go ahead, Livia.
Sorry, yeah, the place where we are now with these tools is that we are using the forum, or that's how we've been thinking about making proposals, so that they go first to the forum, and then that forum link goes to the conviction voting app. And we have the risk of that happening, but then a cultural layer comes in that is, you can see in the forum when was the last edit a post had, or if that post was edited, for example. So there are practices that you can continue to speak about, of like, oh, if you change something, please post in the comments, or even not to, we have a little code of conduct for proposals, and one of the topics is that this should be avoided to the max of changing a proposal after it's posted, but probably this is something that will be integrated in the tool itself in the future, something like that.
I want to.
I was going to say Eugene had made a comment on the chat.
Yeah.
Did you want to share a little more, Eugene, on that before we move on?
Sure, yeah. So yeah, it's just, I always wonder in terms of how people interact with these systems. And I thought that this running the exercise the way you presented it today was a very good kind of manifestation of showing where there are points for possibly being less sort of accountable for what you're doing, and how much can I just barely dial in, get a sense of what people are talking about, do a quick vote and hop out, versus, you know, if I want to delegate my votes, I have to understand who can I possibly delegate to, what are the specifics of what's being discussed. And it just sort of, in my mind, on the one hand, it forces me to be an active citizen of whatever ecosystem and community I'm part of, which I personally love the idea of. And you know, I feel like a lot of us are very much on like, what are the incentives to get that little active citizen bug awaken more people? And I think that's the part that I have no clue how to answer to. So I would love to hear if y'all have had any experience of sort of running this with people who don't want to be more active citizens and are very content with their limited kind of interaction point. Yeah, just how that goes, and what are the possible ways we can help people realize they might enjoy being an active citizen more if the structure around it is a more enjoyable experience than it currently is.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the main reasons conviction voting came about, was to cut down on the barriers to participation. And you know, one of the issues with DAOs I find these days is high attention cost. So trying to find tools that can elicit the right signal without requiring massive overhead in either learning tools or you know, knowing when to participate or where to participate. You know, if we make voting available anytime, you don't have to remember that it's on Thursday, and then on Friday you go, oh, I missed it. Or, you know, having to know when and where to meet. you can just do it anytime. So improving the user experience in some of these tools is really important, and cutting down that attention overhead cost, I think, is a key part to getting that democratic participation in these new form of online institutions.
Andreas, I think was you with your hands up.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just thinking about a combination of quadratic voting and conviction voting, quadratic conviction voting, because I see some benefits in both, and I think there is a possibility to combine it probably. And what I like with quadratic voting is especially you would focus, first of all, you are very much driving participation of small influence participants, because they can have a comparably higher vote, higher voice, and you avoid extremes. In classical one-person one-vote, we have a tendency to mobilize the extremes, and the big majority or the centristic views are underrepresented. And you also have a stronger bundling of votes into topics that you are very much influenced by. So if there's something that has a high influence on me and I'm a minority, I can at least bundle my votes. And also if I have a very strong conviction that my vote is right, I would also bundle. So I think the combination would be very interesting to do.
Definitely. And a lot of the tools that we're working on are composable. Of course, they have to be designed appropriately to be composable. But you could definitely have quadratic conviction voting, and we're really excited for more interest in these tools, because ultimately we want to design them to be useful in many different contexts. But of course, some contexts may require layering of these tools as well. So definitely, yeah, exciting that you came to that same conclusion.
But also, I would like to go back to your point, Andres. You made in the beginning about the educational aspects. So I think here is very crucial that communities are aware of the potential of these tools, and therefore by engaging communities, by understanding how these tools could enable, and then it's linked with what Eugene said, that I try to kind of get rid of my apathy. How, if I understand the impact of a governance innovative tools, it makes me feel important. So I have, let's say, ownership of my decisions, and I feel more involved in the process. For intensity, quadratic voting, conviction voting, they are very useful, but needs more experimentation. I think that's also the direction about this group that we put together. I think in July, just to give a step back with Jeff, we did something similar without the decision space. And thanks to Jessica and Livia, we put the decision space. So we created both, let's say, areas to involve and make people think about the whole process. So thank you for the input and the reflections.
Makes sense, great, yeah. Yeah, and I think the biggest problem is low participation rates. I'm not sure how you see it, but the most important thing is how can we make people participate and use the right to vote and govern.
Yeah, I was thinking too, like I was just writing to Eugene, we have a lot of game designers in the community and kind of behavioral psychologists. And I think just making it more fun, or why do people engage so much with Facebook and Instagram? We have to kind of have these, you know, really smart UI UX people that, you know, okay, you're staking your tokens, you get little hearts. Like, I don't know what works for people to have this kind of dopamine drip or driving the behavior to participate, but hopefully it's in a more healthy way and not so dysfunctional, and something that's also good for, you know, people's mental health and everything else. But yeah, I mean, being a communicator in this space, I think it's synthesizing and digesting the information and having more kind of short form communications, like through emojis or memes. That's why I think memes, you know, are so great and powerful, and TEC is like going crazy with memes. So maybe, you know, a little more balance, but we have like meme parties where we all sit and we churn memes. But I think if we can get more focus in how we apply it to communicating about what decisions need to be made, and then kind of some pros and cons in a fairly, you know, objective analysis, that just more easily digestible content, because people are just, I mean, you're blasted all day long from so many angles. It's an attention game. So what are the things, and I think Antonio, you have some interesting ideas about this as well. like how to make this more engaging and you shouldn't have to like make people engage. It's like, it's so fun or inviting, or the dopamine is there so that people engage.
Well, from the earlier conversation of like choices, thinking a lot about like collective karma and individual karma in the games we play. And the question I just asked to myself is, why don't we have more Farmville style like agricultural simulation social networks for yield farming? So if anybody like worked at Zynga, maybe we can like get them.
Yeah, we're missing gamification. I mean, the good gamification, right? Not the one that addicts people, but the one that drives towards purpose and allows you to connect and to express, you know, and feeling social feedbacks from people around you, that you know that you're heard and you are participating. So there's quite a lot to be done there.
Maybe
to prevent
TikTok.
this overwhelm.
You have to dance your proposal.
But I also think it's
That's a great idea.
Of the mindset. I mean, we are in school, we learn to follow other people's advice, or we have to follow other people, but we do not learn to have a voice. And if I look at my last 20 years of employee life, you have to do things, you have to perform. Then we learned we have to learn continuously. And now I think we have to learn we have a voice. I mean, we have a voice, and we should spend time on using that voice and to educate ourselves and really participate in communities and so on. I mean, it's not for free, and you have to invest time and knowledge and so on. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there is a key part of engagement that is a knowledge. Like even when you're playing a game, if you're really good at the game, if you know how to play it, it's more likely that you will want to play more often, and you will want to play with multiple people or people that you don't know. And I feel like in this governance system, sometimes everything is so like over the head. People have like a general sense of confusion, and not everyone understands what they're doing, where they're at. And the more we can offer information and education and interactive onboarding, I feel like the more people feel engaged and participate. So maybe we don't have a problem of engagement or of voter apathy, but a problem of how information is being shared that touches the point Eugene was talking about. And we have been having a very interesting example of that in the TEC, that we have this dashboard for like understanding how to build the parameters of a DAO. So a very educative process on how this technical parameters are chosen and done in a playful way, and people can discuss with each other. And we've been having an incredible voter turnout. So in the last vote that closed yesterday, we had 66 unique participants voting on the parameters of the DAO. And 66 people voting is huge. I mean, it was 2 weeks that this was open, and that has been following for the last few votes that we have in a similar way, where people can participate and understand a lot about it. So I think that's a key point for engagement, just like knowing how to play.
Was that out of 200 people or 200 or 300? I think around 200 people. So that would be, I think the average percent in blockchain is like 3% or something participation, and we had out of a couple of hundred people, it was, I think.
That's awesome, actually. I just wanted to add that I tend to agree to Livy. It's more about information and less about gamification. At least if this matters for if we're talking about huge decisions. And I think that of course, at the moment, we are somehow, our recognition of voting is somehow distorted by the fact that we are experimenting and things are popping out, or popping up all around us every single day, 24/7. And this is very overwhelming. But think about, okay, 5 years down the road, we might be members of 2 or 3 ecosystems that really matter to us, to our life, to our let's say what we can achieve, what matters to us on this planet or on a very local scale. And I think then it's much more about information and less about gamification to drive participation.
Absolutely. Awesome. Yeah, maybe we'll just take a couple of minutes to wrap it up. I'm sure we can chat about all these topics for much longer, but in the interest of letting everybody get to their next call, ultimately, the point we're trying to get across here is that technical tools don't solve social problems. And in order for blockchains to be useful in real world problems and applications, we need to match the appropriate tools to the context of the decisions being made. So for that, we need to define the decision space and understand the purpose and the goals of these kinds of decisions before we explore what tools are available to access those in the voting space. So we kind of have this lunar decision space where we're exploring what it is that we need to decide, and then getting, perhaps we have consensus tools before we even go to voting tools that can be used, like the advice process or dispute resolution processes, etc. Of course, for some decisions, we need technical tools. So this is kind of getting solar, how we cut down the list of options and choose one or multiple to go forward with. So ultimately, what we'd like to leave you with today is that this governance landscape is wide open for exploration. A lot of these tools are still very new. They can be combined in different ways to suit different contexts. And this exploration has only just begun. So our goal is to create these open blueprints for digital commons governance. And of course, these tools will be applied in so many different contexts and applications that is really up to you. And we're excited to work with everyone here who is interested in using these tools to build the more beautiful world that our hearts know is possible. So thanks very much. We would love you to join our Discord. We actually started up a governance research channel just for this session. So if there are any follow-on conversations, we would love to continue discussing in the Discord. You can also follow us on Twitter. Oh, and Julio is sharing something. I can't quite make out the title. What is it?
It's the book by Charles Eisenstein, the most beautiful world that our hearts know about. So I was just starting to read. Thank you.
Nice. Is that Sacred Economics? Is that the one? I know it's an Eisenstein quote. I'm not sure which book it's from, actually.
The book is called the most beautiful
the more
world
beautiful world our hearts know is possible.
Oh, that's the book itself.
That's
nice.
The title is the name.
Yeah.
Cool. I know I've heard him say it, but I didn't know which book it was from. There's a whole book on the topic. Perfect.
And if I can, a quick advertisement. So we thought it would be good, since this session was so packed with us talking, that tomorrow we would have some more opportunity for discussion. And actually there were a few topics that we talked about, such as the ability to modify rules, which is Elinor Ostrom's Principle 3 and Principles for Governing a Commons. So we're gonna do only like 15 minutes to 20 minutes tomorrow presentation on cultural frameworks for DAO governance and looking at Ostrom's principles, more into dispute resolution and cultural frameworks. And then the rest will just be more open discussion. So I hope you all can join for an hour or even half an hour tomorrow. And if you know anyone that's interested in the cultural side and Elinor Ostrom and a little bit of Denellen Meadows and just more, we want to hear more from you since we talked so much today. So if you can join, we would love to spend more time together. And yeah, if you jump in the Discord, I would love to continue these discussions. And Angela is planning something for July and August to maybe have a governance research group that is active for 8 to 12 weeks within the Token Engineering Academy to really look at maybe building some tools or educational apps or whatever it is that the collective would like to apply their energies to. So that is forthcoming. So we'll just stay tuned.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking forward. Awesome.
Can we call the game Commons Crossing?
Yeah. Get to choose your
Well,
spirit
thank you.
animal.
Thank you so much, everybody. I really appreciate
you.
this.
Yeah,
I
awesome
learned a lot.
session. Thanks a lot.
Oh, I have to take those down.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you, everybody.
This is a great
Bye.
session.
Thank
Thanks
you.
all. See you tomorrow.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hey.
Okay. Bye.
Oh, bye. Have a good day.
You too.